I remember the smell of burned toast the morning everything changed. Funny the details you remember when your life splits in half. Charles stood in the doorway of our kitchen, pale and shaking, holding a single sheet of paper, the kind that wrinkles when sweat touches it. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at me like I was something fragile he couldn't bring himself to shatter. Then finally the words, "Diane, it's over. The company's bankrupt. Everything's gone." I felt the words more than heard them. They hit somewhere beneath my ribs like a dull, cold stone sinking fast. I had always feared this moment not because I didn't believe in Charles, but because I knew how much of himself he had poured into that business. 30 years of marriage had taught me his rhythms, his silences, and his lies. But this one felt different. He dropped the paper on the kitchen table and turned away before I could see his face clearly. I remember touching the edge of the document like it might bite. It was a notice of dissolution notarized dated 2 days ago. No mention of partners, no mention of contingency plans. Just a full stop. Charles had built Caldwell and Associates from nothing, a mid-sized property consulting firm that had become our golden goose. He'd worked late, traveled, often missed birthdays and holidays for this empire, and now, with a single piece of paper, it was all over. My first instinct was to comfort him. That's what a wife does. So I stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, but he stiffened. Not out of grief, not out of shame. Something else. Something like calculation. He pulled away gently. "We'll have to sell the house. Liquidate. I'll speak to a lawyer about filing jointly." I didn't want it to come to this. I nodded, stunned into silence. My heart was already trying to race ahead to the practicals, the bank account balances, the car loans, the jewelry, the backup savings I'd secretly squirreled away from my freelance design gigs. But more than anything, I wanted to believe him. For the next few days, we moved like shadows. He took care of the paperwork with speed that felt almost too efficient. Our accountant, Lisa, someone I'd known for years, suddenly stopped returning my calls. Charles said she was handling things through him. I wanted to trust that, but something stuck like a thorn under my skin. I remember packing the hallway closet. He walked by me on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. I caught fragments. "Next week. Yes, once it's all signed. No, she has no idea. She has no idea." Was that about me? Or was I imagining it? A week later, our house, the one we'd remodeled 5 times, where we'd raised our son and buried my dog in the garden, went on the market. Charles said we needed something more manageable. The buyer was a cash investor. The sale went through fast. Faster than it should have. The moving truck felt like a funeral procession. I rode in silence beside Charles to the rental property he'd picked out in a rush. It was modest, nothing like the home I'd poured myself into for 2 decades. I walked the creaking floors like a stranger. He moved in like he already knew every corner, but I stayed silent. Because I was still in shock. Because I still wanted to believe he had simply failed, not plotted. That night, I lay awake beside him. He was snoring, turned away from me. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly and wondered what bankruptcy truly meant. Not just financially, but emotionally. What happens when the life you built together? Files for Chapter 7. A week later, he started staying out late. Said he was helping his brother sort some finances. When I offered to come, he waved it off. "You've been through enough," he said, and kissed my forehead like I was a child. I smiled. But inside something had shifted. He became distant. Not cold, just watchful, careful. Like he was guarding something invisible. His phone, once left casually on the counter, never left his pocket. His laptop, previously shared between us, now had a new login screen I couldn't pass. And his texts, those he responded to with a tight-lipped smile and the words, "Just business." But we had no business left. One night I stood at the laundry machine folding socks when I found a hotel receipt in his coat pocket. It wasn't near his brother's home. It was coastal 2 hours away. The date last weekend. He had told me he'd slept in the guest room at his brother's place. I held the receipt in my hands for 10 minutes frozen. It was the first time I allowed the thought to breathe. He's not just leaving the business. He's leaving me. But I didn't confront him, not yet. Because when a woman suspects betrayal, it isn't fire that fuels her. It's silence. The kind that collects, sharpens, and waits. The next morning he smiled at me like nothing had changed. Asked if I needed anything from the store. I shook my head. "I'm fine," I said, folding the receipt into the sleeve of my journal. That's when I started writing everything down. Every detail. Every change. Every shadow. Because if this was the start of my end, then I would make sure it would also be his undoing. The boxes stacked in the living room of our new rental felt like coffins, each one labeled with years of my life kitchenware, fragile guest room books, Diane's studio, canvases. I used to joke that if the house ever burned down, I'd rebuild it from memory. But now, sitting in a 2-bedroom rental with yellowed blinds and chipped linoleum, it hit me I was the one being burned down. Charles didn't seem bothered. In fact, he moved through this strange new life with unsettling ease. He was suddenly up earlier than me, dressed and out of the house before I even made coffee. No more aimless pacing, no more midnight stress. He told me he was looking into consulting work, but there were no calls from clients, no emails I could glimpse. Just his briefcase always zipped and his phone clutched like a lifeline. I tried to help him look for options. I offered to tap into my old interior design clients, maybe find a project or two that could get us through. His response: "Diane, you don't need to stress about that. Let me carry this for once." It sounded like kindness, but it tasted like condescension. He'd always encouraged my work when it was convenient, when it paid for vacations or filled the gap between his bonuses. But now that the stakes were real, when we truly needed income, he wanted me on the sidelines, quiet, dependent. That's when I began to understand. This wasn't a man broken by failure. This was a man carefully sculpting an exit. We started selling things, everything we could. My antique dresser went to a stranger who haggled me down $50. The piano, which had once belonged to Charles's mother, was gone in a day. Jewelry disappeared too. Some I sold. Others, I just couldn't find. "Maybe you packed it?" Charles would say, his brow furrowed like he was genuinely trying to help. I hadn't. I remember sitting on the floor that evening, opening box after box. My fingers trembled as I peeled back layers of paper towels and cloth, desperate to find the locket my grandmother had given me when I turned 18. Gone. And yet, Charles sat on the couch, calm, flipping through television channels like we were on vacation. "Diane," he said casually, "maybe this is good for us." Stripping back, getting simple, rebuilding what I asked. He looked at me, really looked, and smiled. Us. But there was no us in his eyes. There was only distance, that polished smile that never reached the corners. That night, after he fell asleep, I went to his office, if you could call it that. Just a desk wedged into the spare bedroom with some old papers and a printer that hadn't worked in years. I sat there and turned on the computer. Password protected. I tried the usual suspects: our wedding date, his birthday, our son's name, even our old anniversary trip to Napa. Nothing worked. That's when I knew. He didn't want me inside his world anymore. Not even digitally. But then, as I stood to leave, I noticed something tucked beneath the desk. A stack of envelopes, most of them unopened. One caught my eye. A return address from an investment firm we'd never worked with. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding. Inside was a quarterly statement addressed to Charles D. Caldwell and another name, Amanda Reeve. Who the hell was Amanda Reeve? The account had over $78,000 in it. I stared at it. my throat tightening, bile creeping up the back of my tongue. This wasn't just about hiding money. This was a joint investment account. She was real. She was part of his future. And I was an inconvenience. I folded the statement carefully and slid it into my planner. From that moment forward, I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to help. I smiled when he told me he'd be home late. I nodded when he said he was going into the city to meet someone about a loan. I let him believe I was too fragile, too stunned to piece anything together. But in reality, I was watching everything. 3 days later, a courier dropped off some documents while Charles was out. Legal stuff. One caught my attention, a property reassignment agreement. My name was listed as the former co-owner of our vacation lot by the lake. It had been transferred. Backdated. He'd forged my signature. I wanted to scream. But instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper for nearly an hour. My hands were cold, my face flushed. But I didn't move. I just kept reading that signature, the fake curves of my name again and again. That night, Charles came home with a bag of takeout and a bottle of wine. He was humming. He kissed my cheek. "Thought we could use something nice," he said. I toasted with him. I drank slowly. I smiled. And the entire time I was memorizing the contours of his lies. I began checking the mail daily, making mental notes of what went missing. I requested bank statements to be sent digitally to a private email I'd created. I ordered a safe and locked away every receipt, every photocopy, every screen grab. My hands trembled sometimes, but my resolve never did. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about erasure. He wanted to make it seem like I never mattered, like I never existed in the empire he'd built, nor the new life he was constructing with this Amanda woman. But I did matter, and I would make sure he remembered it. The night before our 28th anniversary, he didn't come home. No call, no text, just radio silence. The next morning, he blamed a dead phone battery and said he'd crashed on his brother's couch. I nodded, said nothing. But I had seen the ATM withdrawal from a resort an hour away made at 11:27 p.m. The same resort I had suggested we visit last year, which he said he hated. He wasn't building a new life. He'd already started living it, without me. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated the woman he taught to survive, the one who had rebuilt homes from ruins and knew how to lay a foundation while the walls were burning. The things that ruin a marriage don't always explode. Sometimes they whisper. And Charles's betrayal wasn't loud. It was methodical, quiet, and practiced, like someone folding laundry or sharpening a knife. After that anniversary night, the one he missed completely, something inside me shifted. Not just emotionally, strategically. I stopped responding like a wife. I started thinking like a woman preparing for war. And war, in my case, meant silence. I no longer asked where he was going. I didn't wait up. I didn't press him about the phone calls he took in the bathroom or the sudden urgency to change passwords and redirect bills. I just made coffee every morning, packed my own small lunch, and went on long design consultations, which in reality were hours spent in the public library's computer lab digging. It started with Amanda Reeve, the name on the investment account. She wasn't hard to find. She had a public profile real estate agent, early 40s, always smiling through blinding white teeth in front of staged condos. Single, no children, based 2 towns away near the coast. Her agency bio was dripping with charm, passionate about helping others find their forever home. I almost laughed. She already had mine. I printed everything I found. Not because I wasn't tech-savvy, but because I needed something tactile, something I could hold while I tried to keep from falling apart. Next came the paper trail. I found more joint accounts, most opened in the past year, timed exactly with Charles's increasing business stress. He had funneled money through 2 shell companies and transferred small but steady amounts monthly. Nothing huge, nothing flashy. just enough to slowly strip away our marital assets and rebirth them under new names, new ownership, and all of it without mine. One file hit hardest: a condo lease, waterfront, expensive. Paid up front 6 months in advance, and both names on the lease Charles D. Caldwell and Amanda Reeve. The lease had started 2 weeks before he told me we were bankrupt. He had faked failure and mourned nothing. I stared at the lease printed in thick font on crisp legal paper and realized something brutal. He had been planning this for a long time. Every fight he picked about money, every time he forgot to update me on bills, every careless withdrawal from our joint account. He had been preparing my downfall like a man sketching blueprints for a demolition, and I had helped him pour the cement. The night I found the lease, he came home whistling. He brought me soup from my favorite place as if to offer peace for no declared war. I played along, ate slowly, smiled when he told me we'd get through this. "Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were?" I asked gently. He paused. "Maybe not exactly. But something new, Diane. We could start fresh. Fresh. Like I was rotting." He reached for my hand. "Let's not look back. Let's focus on what we have now." I looked at him and nodded. "You're right." And I meant it. Because I already knew what I had now: ammunition. I began building a record. Quietly. Carefully. My phone became a scanner. My planner a fortress. I downloaded a secure cloud service and uploaded everything: financials, images of forged documents, even a photo of the signature page he'd altered on our lake house deed. That one hurt. It was the place where we had celebrated our 10th anniversary, where we'd once planned to retire. Now it was in Amanda's name. She had probably walked barefoot across the dock where I once stood, wine in hand, believing in forever. But no more. 2 weeks later, Charles announced he was going to visit his brother again. "He needs help with a contractor dispute," he said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded. "You always know how to fix things." He blinked, sensing something underneath. But I smiled, kissed his cheek, and waved him off. The moment his car turned the corner, I was already on my laptop. I used a tracking login I'd installed on our shared iPad, the one he forgot still synced locations with my cloud. I watched the blue dot travel south. Not to his brother's house. Straight to the coast. Right to Amanda's condo. I drove there. Not recklessly. Calmly. Window down. Wind in my hair like a widow on her way to a funeral. I parked 3 buildings down. Walked. It was evening, soft light glowing through coastal mist. I saw them before they saw me. He opened the door for her, carrying groceries. She giggled, touched his arm, leaned into his chest. They kissed like teenagers. She said something I couldn't hear. He laughed, threw his head back. I recognized that laugh. It was the one he hadn't used in years. Not with me. I stood in the shadows behind the veil of a tree and watched them disappear inside my future. And I made a vow, not to destroy them. That would be too easy. I would outlast them, outsmart them, reclaim everything they stole, not just the money, but the version of me they thought they had buried. When I got home, Charles texted me from her bed, "Staying over. Too late to drive. Don't wait up." I didn't respond. I just opened a new document on my computer and typed the first line of my plan. He thinks I'm broken, but I'm not. That night I didn't cry. I packed a suitcase, not to leave, but to begin sorting the pieces of my own independence. I cleaned my studio. I pulled out my tax records. I emailed a name I hadn't spoken in years, Camille Dryden, my former client and now one of the sharpest family attorneys in the state. The subject line: "I need help." Quietly. Camille responded within an hour. The email was short, discreet, and direct, exactly how I remembered her. "Of course. My office, 10 a.m. Tuesday. Use the side entrance." The last time we'd spoken, I was designing her summer home. She was newly divorced, radiant with relief, and had joked, If I ever see another man in a tailored suit, I'll scream. Back then, I laughed with her. Now I understood her. Tuesday came. I wore black slacks and a plain blouse, nothing to draw attention. I parked in the lot 2 blocks away just in case. Camille's firm was in a sleek brick building with frosted windows and no sign on the door. Just a buzzer and her initials on a silver plate. She opened it herself. "Diane," she said, folding me into a brief but warm hug. "Let's ruin his life legally, shall we?" I exhaled. The tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders eased just slightly. We sat in a glass-walled conference room. I spread out my folders, bank statements, photographs, copies of forged deeds, his fake bankruptcy filing, and most importantly, the trail of hidden assets with Amanda Reeves' name all over them. Camille flipped through them with sharp eyes. She didn't ask many questions she didn't need to. When she reached the forged signature, she froze. "He used this in court." "Not yet," I said. "But he will. He's trying to erase me from everything financially and emotionally. I'm just ahead of him now." Her expression darkened. "You're going to need more than evidence. You're going to need control." I frowned. "Control of what leverage?" she said. "The moment he thinks you're on to him, he'll move fast, and he'll be ruthless. We need to file first, quietly, and get him served after we've frozen the accounts." She explained how we'd move, step by step. I'd need to open my own bank account immediately, pull what I could from any remaining shared resources, and file an emergency motion to prevent asset depletion. She'd file for divorce the same day, citing fraud and concealment. We'd request a forensic accountant. Then, sit back and let the system do its work. But he's already transferred everything, I whispered. Not everything, she said. You still have your name, your voice, your story. The courts don't like deception. And you have receipts. That afternoon, I drove home like a ghost, silent, floating, unreal. Charles was waiting for me. He stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, chopping bell peppers like a husband in a commercial. "Hey," he smiled. "Thought I'd cook tonight." I walked in slowly. "What's the occasion?" he shrugged. "You've been stressed. I wanted to do something nice." I looked at the cutting board. Red and green slivers perfectly lined up, just like the lies he'd sliced through our marriage. "Thanks," I said quietly. "It smells good." He poured 2 glasses of wine. "To us," he said. I raised my glass but didn't clink. I didn't drink. That night I waited until he fell asleep, then moved into the guest room. I couldn't share space with someone who had so carefully dismantled me. The next morning, I filed everything Camille had prepared. I moved the funds, sent the service request, filed the emergency motion. I had 1 hour before Charles would receive the envelope at his office, which, by the way, wasn't an office anymore. He had lied to me about that too. He was running his new life out of Amanda's spare room. By noon, I was back at home, sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting. At exactly 12:13 p.m., I heard the door slam. Charles stormed in, his voice already rising. "Are you insane?" I didn't flinch. He stood in the bedroom doorway, holding the thick envelope Camille had arranged for him. His face was a canvas of disbelief, panic, and fury. "You filed against me?" "No," I said, rising slowly. "I filed for myself." He stared at me like I was a stranger. "I gave you everything," he barked. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You took everything. And I let you until now." He stepped forward. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said. "I've started keeping score." His jaw clenched. "This will ruin both of us." I tilted my head. "I'm already ruined, Charles. I just decided to stop pretending I'm not." He turned away, pacing. "You'll get nothing." I moved. "I know where you moved it," I interrupted. "All of it. Amanda's accounts, the condo, even the private life insurance you tried to reroute. You were sloppy." He spun around, rage flashing. "You were watching me." "No," I said. I was studying you. And for once, he had no comeback. That night, he didn't sleep at home. Good. I used the silence to go through the final accounts Camille had traced. I made a list, not just of what I'd reclaim, but of what I'd rebuild brick by brick. Because betrayal is loud, but revenge is patient. And I was finally learning patience. The next morning, I received a text from Amanda's office number. "I don't know what your problem is, but leave Charles alone." I laughed. Out loud. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted it, sent it to Camille, and titled the message, "Let's add harassment to the file." The days that followed were eerily quiet. Charles didn't come home. No phone calls, no texts, nothing. But the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the eye of a storm, the part where the wind holds its breath before it tears the roof off. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I was alert. Camille kept me informed. "He lawyered up," she said over the phone, her voice crisp. But his new attorney didn't seem too surprised by the fraud allegations. "Makes me think this isn't the first time your husband's played games like this." My blood ran cold. I had been so focused on our story, the betrayal I'd uncovered, that I hadn't even considered the possibility that Amanda wasn't his first betrayal. Just the first one I'd caught. How many women had he quietly erased along the way? How many lies had I taken as minor inconsistencies, mood swings, or stress? Charles had always been charming, self-deprecating, clever with words. He'd tell a story and make you feel like you were in on the joke, not the punchline. But now I could see it. Every joke came at someone's expense, and often it had been mine. I reopened old memories like files, times when our accounts didn't quite match, times when he'd asked me to sign documents late at night after wine. That surprise trip to Tahoe I never got the full itinerary for. And most damning of all, the moment 5 years ago when we rewrote our wills just to be safe, and I'd trusted him to handle the filing. I couldn't trust a single word of my history anymore, but I still had my instincts. And now, I had Camille. 2 days after the court filing, Charles made his next move a public post on social media. "Going through a tough time. Please respect our privacy. Some people can't let go even when it's best for everyone." Subtle, blame-shifting. Just enough ambiguity to cast me as the unstable one. That had always been his quiet weapon, not to accuse me directly, but to imply that I was the problem. Camille called as soon as it went live. "We respond with facts. Not pity," she said. "Let him play the victim. You have proof. Courts like proof." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. My stomach churned. Not because I feared the lies, but because I knew how easily people believe the storyteller, not the truth. Especially when the storyteller looks like Charles, clean-cut, steady, grieving the loss of what could have been. Meanwhile, I was just a woman, quietly piecing her life back together, one notarized document at a time. The next major blow came through Camille's forensic accountant. Charles had already begun transferring funds from Amanda's accounts into a shared LLC, one they had created only a month before the bankruptcy. The purpose? Real estate flipping. He was planning a future without me, using the money I had helped him grow. When I saw the LLC paperwork, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt steady. Like something inside me had finally clicked into place. This man wasn't just careless. He was deliberate. He had spent months, maybe years, laying the groundwork to vanish, to strip me of value and reinvent himself as a loving, successful man beside a younger, oblivious partner. Amanda, for all her smugness, had no idea she was just a cleaner slate. A new stage. She probably thought he adored her. Believed her laugh was special. Thought she'd won. She hadn't. She'd just joined the cast. Meanwhile, I was rewriting the script. Camille filed the next set of motions, injunctions, asset freezes, and a request for Charles to appear for a deposition under oath. The judge approved the freeze, effective immediately. That's when Charles broke the silence. He came home. Not sheepish, not furious. Just calculated. He walked into the rental like it was still his kingdom. I was standing by the kitchen sink rinsing a plate. I didn't turn around. "I didn't think you'd be here," he said. "I live here," I replied. A pause. "I just wanted to talk," he said. I dried my hands and turned. He looked thinner. Or maybe just smaller. "I'm listening," I said. "I never wanted it to be like this." He began, his voice soft, rehearsed. "We were drifting. I thought, if I eased the transition, maybe it would hurt less." "Eased the transition," I repeated. "You're not blameless, Diane," he added quickly. "You stopped believing in me." I stared at him. He was still rewriting history even now. "I didn't stop believing in you," I said. "I believed too much. That's the problem." He rubbed his temples, sighing. "I'm with Amanda now. You know that." "I do," I said calmly. "And so does the court." His head snapped up. "I've frozen the LLC account. All assets linked to Caldwell Holdings are now under review, including the condo, including the lake house, including Amanda's commissions." His face went gray. "You can't do that." "I did do that." He took a step closer. "This doesn't have to be a war." I met his eyes. "Charles, this isn't a war. This is consequences." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And for the first time I saw it. Fear. Real bone-deep fear. Because he knew now I wasn't broken. I was awake. "I want the house back," I said. He blinked. "It's sold." "No, it's in trust," I replied. "You used a holding company." I tracked it. "It's tied to Amanda's name, but her signature isn't valid without mine. The sale wasn't complete." He staggered back slightly. "You should go," I said. And he did. Not another word. Just turned and left. That night I opened a bottle of wine, not to celebrate, but to mark the beginning of something new. Not healing that would come later, but clarity. And clarity is the first form of power. It's strange how quickly people change when they lose control of the story. Charles, once so confident in his manipulation, began scrambling like a man caught with his hand still in the safe. His silence turned to noise. Within days, I received messages from mutual friends, carefully phrased, unnervingly neutral. "Hey, Diane, I heard you're going through something. Charles mentioned you might be struggling emotionally. Want to grab coffee?" Another Charles told me he's worried about you, that maybe you're acting out of hurt. Just thought I'd check in. And then came the most infuriating, sometimes marriages just end. He still respects you. You know. I stared at my phone and felt a heat bloom behind my eyes. Not tears, not grief, but rage. He was already rewriting the narrative. Not just with Amanda. Not just in court. In the world. He wanted to be seen as the calm, concerned ex-husband who tried everything, who walked away with sorrow, not greed. A man who tried but whose wife couldn't let go. It made me sick. But Camille was right. We didn't fight lies with emotion. We fought them with evidence. And so I gathered more. Every time a concerned friend reached out, I documented it. Every time Charles sent me a veiled message through someone else, I traced the source. Every whisper he spread about my supposed emotional instability was added to a folder marked reputation tampering. He wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to erase me again. But something unexpected happened too. One friend, an old neighbor named Rosa, invited me over for tea. I assumed it would be another ambush of polite concern. But when I arrived, Rosa closed the curtains and handed me a folded envelope. "It's from Amanda," she said, eyes flicking toward the front door. "She came to me in secret. Thought you should see this." I opened it slowly. Inside were screenshots, emails, even a printed transcript of a text exchange. Amanda, it turned out, was starting to realize the truth. He had lied to her too. She hadn't known about the forged documents, about the accounts that traced back to her name. She thought Charles had left me cleanly, that the divorce had happened years ago, that the money he invested with her came from a buyout, not a carefully orchestrated scam. In the messages, Amanda confronted him. "You said she wanted nothing, that she signed it all away. You used me." His reply: "She's emotionally unstable. I'm cleaning up her mess. You knew that." Amanda's final message in the chain stopped me cold. "If she goes down, I go down. Don't contact me again." I sat in Rosa's kitchen stunned. This woman, the one who had kissed my husband on the dock and smirked at me during our accidental confrontation, had turned. Not out of guilt maybe, but out of self-preservation. And it was enough. With Camille's help, we added Amanda's statements to our file. It wasn't a direct confession, but it painted a picture, one that the court would see. Charles wasn't just a betrayer. He was a manipulator of multiple women. And one of them was beginning to speak. The next deposition was scheduled for the following week. Camille prepped me thoroughly. Calm voice. Facts only. No emotional bait. She reminded me that Charles would likely play the victim even under oath. But I was ready. The day of the deposition, I wore gray. Not black too dramatic. Not blue too soft. Just gray. Steady. Neutral. Unshakable. Charles arrived with his lawyer frowning but composed. Amanda wasn't there. He glanced at me, then away like I was something indecent. The court reporter began recording. Camille's tone was razor-sharp but civil. She laid out the questions in chronological order, each one layered with implication. At first, Charles tried to deflect, claimed he didn't remember when accounts were opened, said he was advised by a financial planner on some of the decisions. Camille waited until just the right moment. Then she slid a folder across the table. Inside, Amanda's messages, bank statements, dated withdrawals, property assignments. Even the photo of the forged signature next to my actual one, signed just days later on an unrelated document. "Can you explain?" she asked gently, "how your wife could have signed this deed when she was out of the country visiting her mother and has passport stamps to prove it?" Charles didn't answer. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Camille leaned back. "I'll give you time." The silence in that room was a symphony. After the deposition, Charles tried to follow me out of the building. "Diane, wait," I turned. "Don't. Whatever you think you can fix with words, it's too late." His expression changed from panic to calculation, the look I'd grown so used to. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "No. I regret loving someone who thought I was disposable, but what I'm doing now, I'll never regret that." He didn't respond, and for the first time, he had no script. The court hearings began 2 weeks later. They weren't dramatic, not like the movies. No slamming gavels, no shouting lawyers. Just a sterile room, a judge in glasses who barely looked up, and the slow clinical unfolding of a life unraveled on paper. But even in that quiet, the power shifted, and I felt it. Camille laid out the facts with surgical precision. One by one, the pieces landed like silent grenades. The falsified bankruptcy, the forged deed, the hidden accounts traced to Amanda, the messages, the emails, the lies. Charles sat beside his lawyer, no longer in his tailored suits. Now he wore something plain, washed out, like the character in a story who thought he was the author until someone else picked up the pen. I didn't look at him often. I didn't need to. The judge saw everything he was trying not to say. And more importantly, everything I had kept quiet until now. Still, it wasn't over. Charles wasn't done trying to twist the truth. After the hearing, his lawyer filed a motion to claim I had manipulated evidence, that I had coerced Amanda into turning over private information. It was weak. Camille called it one last spasm of control. But I felt something else. Desperation. A man like Charles didn't crumble in front of you. He eroded slowly, piece by piece, until all that remained was the performance. And now that the audience was gone, he had nothing left to play to. But then, something unexpected happened. Amanda showed up. Not in court, but in my inbox. It was a short message. No greeting. He did the same to me. Not the money, but the lies. Said he was divorced. Said you were bitter. I didn't know until it was too late. He moved in, used my accounts, even asked me to put my name on a mortgage. I froze everything I could. If you need a witness, I'll come. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I forgave her, but because I realized she was never his partner. She was his next victim, and that somehow made me feel both vindicated and sick. I forwarded the message to Camille. Her response came instantly. We'll use it in the next hearing. It solidifies your case, especially with the forged documents and timeline. His pattern is undeniable. Then she added something else. And it means he has nowhere else to run. For the first time in months, I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without flinching at every creak in the house. 3 days later, I went to see the condo. The condo. The one they had kissed outside of, laughed inside of, built a fantasy life within. It was empty now. Amanda had moved out. Quietly, legally. Frozen the accounts. Changed the locks. But the building manager let me in under my legal access request, as the wife still entangled in its ownership through LLC filings. It was surreal. The rooms still smelled faintly of her perfume, citrus, and something sugary. The bed was unmade. One drawer was broken. There were 2 wine glasses in the sink. But otherwise, it felt hollow. Like a stage set waiting to be dismantled. I stood in the living room and ran my fingers along the counter. Not out of sentiment, but to prove to myself that I had survived it, that I could stand in the space where I was erased and feel not sorrow, but ownership. This wasn't love. It was a transaction, and he had miscalculated the cost. I took one photo. Just one. The sunlight through the window hitting the hardwood floor, empty, raw, real. Then I turned and walked out. Not like someone who'd lost, but like someone who had already chosen what she'd rebuild next. When the final hearing came, Charles didn't speak. He didn't testify. He didn't fight. Camille said it best. He's done playing chess. You flipped the board. The judge ruled in our favor. The condo sold. Proceeds split 70-30 in my favor. The lake house returned to my name in full. The forged documents submitted for criminal review. The accounts frozen pending further investigation. And the best part, his attempt to file for spousal support denied outright. When the gavel finally came down, I didn't cry. I just breathed. A slow, deep breath I hadn't allowed myself in months. Outside the courthouse, Camille hugged me. You did more than win, she said. You reclaimed your narrative. I nodded. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Because victory would come later, quietly, privately, in the moments he wouldn't see. In the quiet mornings with coffee and peace. In the sun streaming through my windows into my home with no shadows of lies lurking in the corners. Victory wouldn't be loud. It would be mine. You'd think once the court ruled in my favor, I'd feel free. Like I'd walk out of that courtroom lighter, triumphant, reborn. But that's not what happened. What happened was silence. Not peace. Just quiet. An eerie, numb stillness that followed me everywhere, to the grocery store, the dry cleaner, the therapist's office I finally called. I wasn't crying anymore. Wasn't angry either. I just felt suspended. Camille called a few days after the final ruling to check in. She was already moving on to her next case, but she asked me gently, "How are you really?" And I told her the truth. I don't know who I am without him to protect myself from. Because for nearly 3 decades, my life had revolved around Charles, around accommodating his moods, smoothing over his decisions, questioning my own instincts, just to keep the marriage from cracking. Even when he began slipping away from me emotionally, financially, I didn't fight back until he tried to erase me completely. Now that he was gone, I had to ask who was I without a man to brace against. I was about to find out. The first step was reclaiming the spaces he'd infected. I returned to the lake house alone. The keys were cold in my hand. The gate creaked from rust and weeds had overtaken the flower beds I once tended like children. But the dock was still there, warped and weathered but solid. And the view, that hadn't changed. Water stretching wide, calm but powerful. I walked the shoreline barefoot. It was March, the ground still firm and cold, but I didn't care. I needed to feel something real. Something that wasn't a file folder or a court date or a signature forged in my name. I sat on the dock for a long time, and I started talking to no one, or maybe to myself, to the woman I used to be. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for trusting too blindly, for shrinking when I should have asked questions, for believing love was meant to be endured instead of chosen." Then I promised her something: no more disappearing. I began therapy soon after, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to stay whole. I needed a place to say things like, "I thought I was smart enough to see this coming. I feel ashamed I stayed as long as I did. I'm afraid I won't know how to trust anyone again." And to hear in return, "You saw what you were allowed to see. You stayed because you loved." And trust isn't something you find again, it's something you learn to give carefully. It wasn't instant healing. It was slow, quiet, but it was mine. I moved back into the lake house permanently by spring, sold the rental, reinvented my design business under a new name, Diane Caldwell Interiors. No more en cotoin, no more hiding behind a man's illusion of partnership. Clients returned. New ones came. I didn't market myself as the woman who survived a scandal. I just showed up with swatches, sketches, and calm confidence. But word got around anyway. One afternoon, Amanda came to see me. Unannounced. Uninvited. I was arranging textiles in the studio when I heard the knock. My stomach clenched, but I opened the door. She looked smaller. Not in stature, but in presence. Hair pulled back, face bare, eyes tired. "I won't stay long," she said. I needed to say something." I said nothing. Just opened the door wider. She stepped in, looked around the studio, and then back at me. I didn't know the whole truth. I wanted to believe he loved me. I think part of me knew he didn't, but he made it feel easier than being alone. I stayed quiet. Amanda swallowed. "I'm sorry. For my part in this. For not asking harder questions. For not listening when my gut told me something was off." I didn't forgive her, but I didn't hate her either. I saw her clearly now, not as the villain in my story, but as another woman Charles had written into his fantasy, only to crumble when she became inconvenient. "You don't owe me anything," I said. But she shook her head. "Maybe not." But I needed to say it anyway. Then she left, and I closed the door behind her softly, not angrily. Some chapters didn't need to end with fireworks. Some just needed to close. In April, I received a letter. From Charles. It was handwritten. The envelope bore no return address. I sat on my front porch, sunlight brushing my shoulders, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were 3 short paragraphs. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply said, "I hope one day you see that I loved you in my own way." I read it twice, then I burned it in the fire pit. Because I did see how he loved me with control, manipulation, and just enough affection to keep me tethered until I was too afraid to cut the rope. But I had cut it, and now I was floating freely, not lost, but finally untethered. Spring melted into early summer. The lake shimmered longer in the afternoons, casting golden light across the dock, where I now sat every evening barefoot and quiet. I no longer checked the mail with dread, no longer flinched at unknown numbers or paused at the sound of Charles's name. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I listened to myself breathe. One Saturday morning, I opened an old trunk in the attic of the lake house one Charles had insisted we keep locked for storage. Inside, beneath dusty blankets and photo albums, I found sketches from my early design years, hand-drawn layouts, color palettes I had created for myself before anyone paid me for them. The lines were uneven, the corners imperfect. But they were mine. I sat on the attic floor for nearly an hour, fingers tracing the pencil strokes of a woman who once dreamed of being more than just Mrs. Caldwell. A woman who had once signed her name boldly with flourishes. I hadn't seen that signature in years, and suddenly, I wanted it back. So I made a plan. I wasn't just going to reclaim my name, I was going to make it known. I registered a domain dianecaldwelldesign.com, launched a simple site, photographed my best work, told my real story, not the scandal, not the betrayal, but the reinvention. I wrote about sustainable design, reclaimed materials, and healing spaces, about building from the ruins with intention. Clients responded, some from the past, some brand new. They didn't ask about Charles, they asked about me. It was subtle, but it was working. Then one afternoon, Camille called. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since the last paperwork had been filed and the settlement finalized. I thought I'd let you know, she said. Charles is under investigation. Amanda filed her own report. I paused, uncertain what to feel. They're looking into potential tax fraud, misuse of corporate funds, and do I need to be involved? I interrupted. No, she replied. You've done your part. This is her turn. I thanked her, hung up, and sat very still. I should have felt satisfied. I didn't. Not because he didn't deserve it, he did, and more. But because somewhere along the way I had stopped needing him to suffer for me to be free. His downfall no longer defined my rise. That evening, I hosted a dinner, my first in over a year. Just 6 people. Friends. Real ones. Rosa brought wine. Camille arrived late, but radiant. I served roast chicken, fresh greens from the local farm stand, and my mother's lemon pie. We laughed. Loudly. Without caution. After dessert, Camille raised her glass. To Diane, she said, for showing us that reclaiming your life doesn't start with revenge. It starts with remembering you're still the author of your own story. I blinked back tears. Not from sadness, but from recognition. These people saw me, not as a victim, not as a wife left behind, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself with nothing but truth and grit. And I was proud of her. The first time I saw Charles again was by accident. Late summer, maybe early fall, I can't remember the exact date, because it wasn't significant in the way I expected. I had just come out of the Co-op grocery store downtown with a paper bag of fresh peaches and thyme when I spotted him across the street. He was alone. No Amanda, no smile, no tailored jacket. He stood outside a bank looking down at his phone with a kind of quiet urgency, like a man hoping for good news, but expecting the worst. I watched him for a few seconds longer than I should have, not because I wanted to say anything, but because I wanted to feel something. And what I felt was nothing. No rage, no desire to confront, no satisfaction either, just silence, like a bell that had stopped ringing. I turned and walked away, the breeze catching my hair, the peaches warm through the paper. It wasn't closure. It was something better. It was indifference. But healing wasn't a straight line. One evening, I was reorganizing my old files when I found a letter Charles had written me on our 10th anniversary. Handwritten, folded inside a faded blue envelope. It started with, "To the woman who has given me everything." I held it for a long time, longer than I expected. I read every word. And yes, my heart ached. Not because I missed him, but because I missed the version of myself that believed those words were true. She had been hopeful, generous, trusting. She deserved better than the man who wrote that letter. So I didn't tear it up. I didn't burn it either. I buried it. In the garden behind the lake house where wildflowers now grew through the soil I once thought was ruined. I folded the letter small, wrapped it in linen, and planted it beneath a fresh patch of violets. A parting ritual. Not for him. For me. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The lake was glassy, still holding the pink shimmer of dawn. I stood at the dock, sipping coffee, breathing slowly. And I said aloud, "I'm proud of you." It felt strange talking to myself, but it was also the most honest sentence I had spoken in years, because I was proud. Of surviving. Of rebuilding. Of never letting someone else's betrayal become the ending of my story. I began writing again. Not letters, not court statements, but essays, little reflections, about design, about trust, about choosing yourself over comfort. I didn't publish them right away. I wasn't ready. But they were mine. Each word a step further from the shadow I once lived in. And then one afternoon my phone rang. It was my son. We hadn't spoken much during the divorce. He was caught in his own storm away at grad school, confused and hurt by the headlines and half-truths that trickled through the family grapevine. But now his voice was steady. "Mom," he said, "I read your website. I saw your name. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner, but I'm proud of you. You've built something real." I blinked fast, trying not to cry. "I'm trying," I whispered. "You're not trying," he said. "You're doing it." Later that week, a client asked me if I was willing to give a talk at a local women's conference. The theme was building again after loss. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to step back into the narrative publicly, but then I remembered something Camille once told me in that sterile courthouse hallway. If you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it for you. So I said yes. On the day of the event, I stood backstage in a soft navy dress clutching a small card with 3 bullet points. But when I walked to the podium and looked out at the audience, mostly women, mostly over 40, all of them watching with the hunger of people who understood pain, I didn't need the card. I just spoke. I thought I was losing everything I began. But really, I was shedding everything that was never truly mine, to begin with the illusion, the silence, the permission I thought I needed to exist fully. And then I told them about Charles, not in bitter detail, but in quiet truth. About how he staged a failure, how he tried to steal not just my finances but my voice, and how I rebuilt not out of vengeance but out of memory. Memory of who I was, before he made me smaller. Afterward, a woman in her 60s came up and said, "You told my story and I didn't even realize I had one." I smiled and replied, "Then it's time you wrote it." After the conference, something shifted. Not externally, not like doors suddenly flung open or money started pouring in, but internally. Like a hinge inside me had been oiled and began to move again. The part of me that had once felt stuck in the shadows was now stepping forward quietly but fully. It began with small things. A woman emailed me the next day. She'd been in the audience at the talk. "You said, 'The silence nearly killed me.'" That sentence stuck. "I've been silent too. I'm leaving my husband next week." Another woman sent a photo. She'd painted her kitchen a soft green, a color I'd once mentioned reminded me of peace. She'd done it herself with shaky hands and determination. "It's not perfect," she wrote, "but neither am I." That's the point, right? Yes, that was the point. Not to be perfect, but to be real, seen, unhidden. It's strange, I never set out to be a voice for anyone. I just wanted to survive. But now survival wasn't enough. I wanted to build again, and this time not from scraps, from choice. I started saying yes more often, to things that scared me, to invitations that felt uncertain, to friendships I had neglected because I'd been too consumed with appearances. I met Rosa for coffee every other Sunday. We didn't talk about Charles. We talked about Booksart, her cat who hated thunder. Real things. I went to a yoga class for the first time in my life. My arms shook during downward dog. I laughed through half of it. But afterward, as I walked barefoot across the studio floor, I felt taller somehow. Lighter. One morning, I drove 2 hours to visit my sister, the one I hadn't spoken to in almost 4 years, because Charles said she was toxic. Turns out she wasn't. She was just honest. She hugged me at the door, eyes wet. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," I answered. We talked for hours, no blame, no timelines. Just truth. Real truth. The kind I had been denied for too long. And then one evening, while sorting through old business files, I came across a notebook I had used early in my career. On the last page was a simple phrase I'd written in pencil years ago, long before marriage and betrayal and courtrooms. Create the kind of space you want to live in, inside and out. I closed the book and smiled. That's what I was doing now. Creating space. In my home. In my heart. In the way I moved through the world. Not cramped or hidden or cautious, but open. Deliberate. One afternoon, Camille called again. "You won't believe this," she said. "Charles is trying to appeal the asset decision on the grounds of emotional duress. Claims he was coerced into signing away financial access during a time of mental strain." I didn't even flinch. I laughed. And then I said the one thing I'd never said before, not to her, not even to myself. Let him. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. I had already won. Not just the settlement, not just the name, but the truth. He could claw at the edges all he wanted, but the foundation, that was mine now. And it was solid. I wrote something that evening. The first piece I ever dared to post publicly on my website. Title: How to Rebuild After Someone Tries to Erase You. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't long. But it was real. I ended it with this: they may take your money, your plans, even your name. But they can't take your voice unless you give it to them. So speak. Not for revenge. For resurrection. 2 days later, it went viral. Thousands of shares. Comments from women and men across the country. And one message that stopped me cold. "This is the first thing I've read that made me want to live again. Thank you." I sat with that. Not with pride, but with awe. Because somewhere between betrayal and reinvention, my wounds had become someone else's map. By fall, the lake house had fully transformed. Not just physically, though. I had repainted every wall, changed out the curtains, and replaced the bed I once shared with Charles. No, the real change was in how it felt. Warm, lived in, mine. It no longer carried the echo of betrayal, only the quiet hum of peace. Every room held intention. The soft green in the kitchen to calm me, the deep blues in the study to ground me. Even the guest room, once cold and unused, had become a small sanctuary. Fresh linens, a stack of books, a vase of dried lavender on the windowsill. When I walked through the house barefoot, there were no ghosts anymore. Only footprints. My own. I woke early on my birthday that October, my first birthday post-divorce. The sun had just risen, laying a soft orange glow across the water. I brewed a cup of coffee, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and stepped out onto the porch. There on the top step sat a single envelope. No name on it. No handwriting I recognized. I stood there for a long moment before picking it up. Inside was a check. $70,400. No note. Just the check folded neatly. It wasn't hard to guess where it came from. Charles. Likely an attempt to buy back something's silence piece, maybe even guilt. I stared at the amount. It was just enough to cover what he'd promised to repay me for the antique collection he liquidated during the fake bankruptcy, the one he claimed was sold for next to nothing but. I'd found out he'd quietly profited more than 3 times what he admitted. I could have ripped the check up. I could have framed it as proof of his cowardice. Instead, I deposited it and donated every cent. to a fund for women starting over after financial abuse. When the foundation director called to thank me, she asked if I'd be willing to speak at one of their retreats, not as a victim, but as a mentor. I said yes, not because I wanted to be anyone's symbol, but because I remembered what it felt like to stand in a kitchen clutching a fake bankruptcy notice, wondering if my life had just ended. I wanted to be the voice in the room that whispered, "It's not over." In November, my son came home for Thanksgiving. He brought his girlfriend, kind, thoughtful, and refreshingly blunt. Over dinner, we laughed. A lot. Talked politics. Debated pumpkin pie versus pecan. At one point, he put his arm around my shoulder and said, "You're lighter now, Mom." I don't mean thinner. I mean, you're not carrying him anymore. I smiled, because it was true. A week later, I received the final closure I hadn't even realized I still needed. Camille emailed me the court's decision. Charles's appeal had been denied swiftly and without even requiring a hearing. Her email was short. "It's done. Officially, finally done. Breathe." And I did. I stepped outside onto the same dock where I once wept, once begged the universe to show me a way forward. Now I stood tall, wrapped in a coat, hair loose, chin up. I closed my eyes and whispered thank you. Not to Charles, not even to fate, but to myself, to the woman who refused to stay erased. I ended that year not with a party, not with fireworks or wine or a dramatic resolution, just with a candle, a journal, and a question I wrote at the top of a blank page. What do you want now that no one is deciding for you? And I let myself answer it, not all at once, but slowly, with reverence. Because for the first time in my adult life, the decisions were mine. I didn't rush into becoming a new version of myself. That was the mistake I'd seen too many women make, jumping from the wreckage of one life into the false security of another, just to feel held, chosen, safe. But I had learned the hard way: you don't rebuild on broken ground. You clear it first. You stand in the dust. You wait until you can feel your own weight again. That's what I was doing now, standing in the dust. And strangely, it felt good. Peaceful. Like breathing through clean air after years of smoke. I stopped calling it the lake house. I started calling it home. I planted a fig tree in the backyard. I painted the front door mustard yellow, bright, strange, confident. It clashed with the shutters. I didn't care. I adopted a rescue dog named Olive who barked at the broom, refused to fetch, and insisted on sleeping curled against my back. She was stubborn and loyal and imperfect. Like me. That December, I finally opened the doors to something I had quietly dreamed about for years: my own studio gallery. Just a little space in town, brick walls, high windows, soft lighting, a place where I could meet clients, showcase work, and hold community events. I called it Foundation not because of design, but because of what it meant to start again. I hosted an open house on a Friday evening. People came, more than I expected. Clients, friends, strangers who had read my essay. Even Rosa, who brought a pie and stood by the fireplace telling everyone she built this after a man tried to disappear her. I laughed, flushed with gratitude and the glow of something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. About halfway through the evening, a woman approached me. Late 40s, silver in her hair, hands tucked into her coat, like she was protecting something fragile. "I just wanted to say, I left my husband last month," she said quietly. "Because of you." My breath caught. She looked around, eyes shining. "I read your post. I followed your story. It gave me permission. Not just to leave, but to believe I wouldn't disappear without him." I reached out and took her hand. "You don't disappear," I said. "You emerge." We hugged. Briefly. Fiercely. She left without staying for wine or cake, but she had already received what she came for: proof. The next morning, I woke to snow, thin and soft, blanketing the dock, the trees, the roofline of the lake house. Olive barked once and then stilled beside the window watching it fall, like she understood something spiritual was happening. I stood beside her coffee in hand robe still warm from sleep, and I whispered, "I'm still here." Not to anyone. Just to the woman who had once doubted she would be. To the version of me that used to stay quiet. The one who asked for permission. The one who begged Charles to explain himself instead of trusting what she already knew. She was gone now. And in her place, a woman who owned every inch of her life, not because someone gave it to her, but because she reclaimed it. Later that week, I received a certified letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Charles. I stood at the kitchen counter for 5 minutes before opening it. Inside a short note and a document. The note read, "This is yours. It always should have been. I'm sorry." The document was the signed deed to the condo, the same beachfront place where he once kissed Amanda, where I once watched my marriage die from a parked car. He had finally signed it over to me. I exhaled, but I felt no triumph. Only confirmation. The last thread had been cut. Not by me, by him. And that was fine, because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't keep the condo. I sold it within a month and used part of the money to start a local grant fund, the first key offering security deposits to women escaping financial abuse. No big fanfare, no speeches. Just small envelopes delivered at the right moment with one sentence inside. This is your first key. The next one is your voice. The rest of the money, I used it to build a new dock on the lake house. Wider, stronger, safer. Big enough for guests, for laughter, for life. I stood on it that spring barefoot, Olive beside me. The breeze was soft. And I realized something simple and extraordinary. I didn't just survive Charles. I survived the version of me that thought I needed him. By spring, my life no longer resembled the one I had before. Not just because Charles was gone or the lawsuits were over or the house had been repainted. The change was deeper, less visible. It was in the way I answered the phone without holding my breath. The way I moved through stores without calculating whether someone was watching me or whether Charles was watching someone else. It was in the way I laughed, unfiltered, loud, from the belly. That had been gone for a long time. I hadn't even noticed when it left. One Saturday, I hosted a small gathering at Foundation. Not a business event, just a community night. Women from the neighborhood brought food. Someone set up a table for kids to draw. A local musician played soft guitar in the corner. Nothing extravagant. Halfway through the evening, an older woman stood beside me, sipping lemonade. "You know, she said you don't look like someone who's been through hell." I smiled. "I've been through worse than that. But thank you." She leaned in. "You look loved." "Is it someone new?" I paused, then laughed. "No," I said. "Just me." She chuckled. "That's rare." "It shouldn't be," I replied. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the string lights cast shadows on the brick walls, I sat alone on one of the benches and thought about that conversation. She was right. I did look loved. Because I was loved. Not by Charles. Not by any man. Not even by the audience that had begun to follow my story online, but by myself. Fully. Finally. Still, life had its quiet surprises. One afternoon in May, I received a card in the mail. No return address. Inside was a short note written in a careful hand. "I'm sorry for what I was part of. I hope you continue to thrive. You deserve to." It was signed Amanda. No last name, no phone number, no request for forgiveness. Just words. And honestly, I appreciated that more than any performance of regret. I held the card for a moment, then slid it into a drawer. I didn't need to respond. Some things are better left closed. But her words landed gently like the final stitch in a long wound that had already begun to heal. That summer, my son brought his girlfriend back to visit again. This time, she walked the lake trail with me. We picked blackberries. Olive chased squirrels and returned muddy and proud. As we sat on the porch sipping iced tea, she said, "He talks about you all the time, you know. How strong you are. How you built your life without bitterness." I looked at her startled. She went on, "He says, you didn't just teach him how to treat women. You taught him how to be a man. Not like his father, but better." My chest tightened. I turned toward the lake to hide my eyes. There was a time I thought I'd failed as a mother, staying too long protecting Charles's image instead of exposing the truth, creating a facade for the sake of family. But hearing that, I knew I hadn't failed. I had simply taken the long way around. And now my son was choosing love rooted in honesty, not illusion. That alone was enough. One night I stood by the open window watching the moonlight dust the surface of the water. Olive was asleep by the fireplace, her breathing soft and steady. I thought about all the things I'd lost. The house Charles stole and sold. The years I'd spent doubting my instincts. The moments I traded away for silence and safety. And then I thought of everything I'd gained. Not to justify the pain, not to romanticize it, but to honor what came after. Because the truth is, you don't always get justice wrapped in a bow. Sometimes justice looks like waking up alone in a bed you made for yourself. Sometimes it's drinking coffee without panic, laughing without shrinking, walking into a room without wondering if you're too much. Sometimes justice is quiet, like the sound of your own name spoken kindly by yourself. By the end of the summer, I had written enough essays to publish a small book. Nothing grand, just a collection of reflections. I titled it, "The House I Built After He Tried to Burn Mine Down." Camille wrote the foreword. We printed 500 copies. They sold out in 2 weeks. But more than that, people wrote back. Letters from women, daughters, even men. They didn't praise me as a hero. They thanked me for telling the truth, for being angry without apology, for walking through shame and betrayal and fear and still choosing to live, not just survive. And in those letters, I saw myself. In all the versions I had been, the woman who stayed, the woman who found out, the woman who filed quietly, the woman who rebuilt louder, the woman who now stood in her home, her name fully hers, not perfect, but real. It's funny how stories end quietly, not with a slam of a door or the sound of tires peeling out on wet pavement, but with the soft click of a lock finally turned from the inside. That's what my life feels like now. Not dramatic, but secure. Mine. Every now and then, I still catch a glimpse of the woman I used to be in old photos, in habits I haven't fully unlearned, in the way my heart tenses when the phone rings too late at night. But she's not a stranger anymore. She's a part of me, the part that endured. And I love her for that. Because she survived what should have broken her. She stayed standing through lies that tried to bury her. She stood alone when no one clapped, when no one saw. And she built a life anyway. The lake house is quiet tonight. Olive is snoring gently beside the fireplace. The windows are open, just a crack enough to let in the sound of frogs. The ripple of water against the dock, the wind rustling through the trees. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, the same one I once sat at, holding a forged document that told me everything I'd worked for was gone. And now, that table is mine. Paid for, clean, steady. I keep a small frame by the window now. It doesn't hold a photo. Just a single sentence typed on soft parchment. Your name is still yours. Because for a long time it wasn't. It was buried in joint accounts and power of attorney and fake bankruptcy filings and all the tiny ways someone like Charles tries to steal a woman's existence without ever raising his voice. But now when someone says my name, I don't shrink. I answer, and I smile. If you've listened this far, maybe it's because part of this story is yours too. Maybe you've been made to feel small, invisible, optional. Maybe someone you trusted tried to rewrite your story and told you that your voice didn't matter. But I'm here to tell you, it does. It always did. Even when it shook. Even when it broke. Even when it was only whispered in the dark. And maybe you're still in it. Still gathering receipts. Still building your escape plan in silence. I see you. I was you. And let me tell you, the day you finally say, enough is the day everything begins again. I'll leave you with this. You don't need anyone to give you permission to reclaim your life. You already have that power. And if you've forgotten how to use it, just say your name out loud. Say it like it's a truth no one can touch. Because it is. Because you are. Thank you for listening to my story.